Welcome, everyone. Glad to see you attend today's webinar. Give it just another few seconds here while participants join the webinar room, and we'll get started. Good to see you all. Okay, we've hit 100 participants, and we are going past it. Love it. Well, good afternoon and good morning, everyone, and welcome to Thrive, a monthly webinar series brought to you by ArcPoint Labs, your single source employer solutions provider, helping business leaders create compliant, safe, and healthy workplaces that thrive. Today's topic, you're in charge. Now what? Mastering DOT drug and alcohol testing in 2026. My name is Ryan West, your host and Thrive specialist, and proud to share the virtual floor today with a long-standing partner of ArcPoint Labs, a nationally recognized leader in the drug and alcohol testing industry, Leslie Prince. Before Leslie takes the virtual stage, a few important announcements. First, next month's Thrive webinar, free, accredited, and you can register for it today. We are so pleased to bring back our friends at Drug Screening Compliance Institute, or DSCI, attorney Bill Judge and his managing partner, Nick Hartman. They will be presenting Designing Compliant, Defensible Drug Screening Programs for Today's Workforce, an excellent segue that will build on today's webinar, so you don't want to miss it. The registration link for that webinar will be in the chat shortly. Second, unless otherwise directed, Thrive webinars will take place on the third Thursday of every month this year from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern Time, 10 to 11 Pacific. Each Thriving Thursday webinar will feature a new speaker and/or new topic that is, one, aligned with ArcPoint's suite of employer solutions, and two, aligned with your voice, content and/or speakers that you have requested for this monthly series. So keep sharing your voice. Once today's webinar concludes, there will be a survey. It's quick, it's easy, and it gives your voice an anonymous platform to influence the type of content that you consume. As an example, as we are actually currently finalizing the details for our Q2 Thrive series today, based on Q3 and Q4 feedback last year, we strategically designed a legal webinar series featuring 2 different attorneys, 3 related but distinct topics that will help keep you and your workplace out of the courtroom. Super excited about that. More details to come. I will be discussing the Q2 series at next month's webinar, and the marketing team will also be communicating more details in the coming weeks. So keep an eye on your inbox and also on social media. And lastly, I want to quickly address the frequently asked questions that we get at the beginning and end of our Thrive webinars, such as, is this training being recorded? Yes, it is. How do I access the recording? Are CEs offered? How will I get them? When will I get my certificate of attendance? So answers to those questions will be posted in the chat shortly. Looks like they were just posted. And they will also be reposted 2 more times towards the middle of today's webinar and then again at the end for your reference. So go to the chat, review that information. Also say hello. Let us know where you're logging in from. If you have questions for our presenter, please use the Q&A function. I'm sure we're going to get some questions. We've got a bona fide expert today. She tends to get a lot of questions. Please use the Q&A function so we don't lose them, so we can address them. And then use the chat function for everything else. It is now my pleasure to introduce our February Thrive speaker, Leslie Prince. Leslie is the founding partner of Compliance Systems and brings more than 30 years of expertise in developing and implementing substance abuse testing programs for employers. She serves as the vice chair of NDASA, the National Drug and Alcohol Screening Association's training committee, and is a member of the NDASA training faculty. She is also NDASA's Georgia State affiliate. Leslie regularly consults with motor carriers across the country on FMCSA regulatory compliance issues such as driver onboarding, file maintenance, and CSA forecasting, and is a featured monthly guest on XM Radio's Road Dog Trucking with Mark Willis. So glad to have her with us again today. Leslie, welcome back to the Thrive series, and the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Ryan. It is a pleasure to be with you all. And thanks so much for taking time. I know that everyone is busy, and we appreciate you sharing an hour of your day with us. Ryan has a couple questions that we're going to ask you, a couple poll questions that'll pop up in here in a few minutes. And so just answer if you don't mind to answer those questions for us. That gives us a little bit of idea of who's on our webinar and also, what your role is and how we can make things better. So, please do participate in those poll questions. And there'll be a couple more as we go through the presentation today. So don't just turn your back on your computer and follow along as we go through our presentation. Today we're focusing on DERs, designated employer representatives. That is hopefully you or someone that you know that serves as that designated employer representative. So that person, the DER, is an official designation by the DOT, and most of our companies in their non-DOT programs refer also to the DER as an official role. So let's just define what that is to start so you know what you've got yourself into. The first one is you are responsible for receiving the drug test from the MRO, from the breath alcohol technician if it's an alcohol test. You're also responsible for receiving information from your collection sites. So if your ArcPoint Labs location has a problem with a collection, they're going to call the DER, and that would be you. So we want to make sure that you've identified yourself properly as the DER, and we have your contact information. We will, if somebody didn't show up for a drug screen, if you called ahead and said, "Hey, I'm sending, Jim Bob over for his drug screen," and Jim Bob didn't show up, we've got to call you. So we need to, that's a very important part of the testing process. Now, the big thing is you need to ensure that no one performs a safety sensitive function until a negative drug test is received. Just yesterday, I got a call from a gal here in Atlanta who had the DOT in her office, in her proverbial office. She's having to upload records, but she is under the gun with the DOT. And she did not realize that she had to do the pre-employment drug screen before she put her driver in the driver's seat. I know that seems, if you do this on a daily basis, that probably seems like common knowledge, but it's always not common. Also, you've got to have the result. It's not just that you sent your person to ArcPoint for their test. You've got to have the result back. And oddly enough, it has to be negative. You're responsible for removing or causing to remove any individual who has violated a drug and alcohol testing rule. So if you get a positive test result back, if you get a refusal to test, that is your responsibility, and that is the one of the primary responsibilities listed in the regulations, that it is your responsibility to make sure that person's removed immediately from a safety sensitive function. If they're out on the road, you can't wait till they get back. You've got to find that driver, put him off to the side of the road, tell him to go to the nearest safe haven, and then you've got to get them out of the truck. They cannot drive once you've been notified that there's been a rule violation. So whether it's you who's doing it or whether you're notifying a supervisor, it is your responsibility to make that happen. So, what do you have to be knowledgeable about? Number one, you've got to know the DOT rules. You're probably not going to have all of them memorized, but you've got to know the majority of them, and you need to know where to look if you don't know the rule. We'll talk about where to look in just a minute. You've got to understand the testing process. You've got to understand the state and federal regulations pertaining to your modality. So if you're a trucking company, not only do you have to know the federal regulations under Part 40, where the collection rules and the MRO rules and the lab rules and all that are held, but you've got to know the FMCSA rules too, because you fall under the FMCSA rules in addition to the DOT rules. Company policy. You've got to have a company policy. So you need to be familiar with your company policy, know where it is, know if you have a question or a problem. The collection site calls you and they have had an issue. You've got somebody who's left before the test has been completed. You need to know what to do. And so you've got to go to your policy and find that out. Union agreement. So if you're a union shop, you need to know what your collective bargaining agreement states. And then what are your daily operating procedures? So how do you manage your test on a routine basis? Now, as we go through our presentation today, we're going to talk about two other professions or two other roles, professional roles in our DOT program. I just want to identify them and define them for you right now. The first is a substance abuse professional, or a SAP. If someone has test positive for drugs or alcohol or refuses a test, they must be removed from duty and go through the SAP return to duty program. We're going to talk about this in a little bit in more depth in a little bit, but I just wanted to define that because sometimes as we do these presentations, we get hung up on we're using these acronyms thinking everybody knows what we're talking about. And usually we forget that this is not your day-to-day world. So I just wanted to define SAP for you. Now, let me just say, if I forget to say it later, if you have someone who's tested positive and they're going through the SAP Return to Duty program, you do not have to pay for it. You just have to ensure that the person has done it. And your ARC Point representative we have some SAPs that we can refer to you. And we also have, next on, an EAP, Employee Assistance Program. And so one of ArcPoint's offerings is an EAP service. It does include SAP services. The FMCSA, Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, so those are your for our trucking friends, they require employers to provide covered employees, so your CDL drivers, with educational materials, and your EAP can help you get that information. So just be aware, EAP is addressed in some of our presentations. SAP is definitely addressed, and so we just wanted to define that for you and make sure you know that we can help you out if you need that.
Hey
Now,
Liz, real quick
yeah,
before we go any further, we finally got the poll software working, and we were able to get 100 participants responding to that icebreaker. Can
yeah,
you see that information?
I sure can.
Awesome.
So, of the folks that are online today, over half of you are in the HR department, 20% are in the safety department, and 25% are in other roles. That's great.
And if you scroll down, you can see the DER
Yeah.
information.
Yeah, we've got some great experienced DERs with us. Over a third of you have been a DER for more than 5 years. So that's fantastic. I hope you'll pick up some nuggets from this. This just helps us know where we what we need to focus during our presentation. So thanks so much for answering those questions. All right, we want to talk about the components of a drug and alcohol testing program because we want to make sure that you've got a full-blown program. You understand what you've got to do. And so we just wanted to cover there are really four basic components to that. First, you've got to have a company policy. If you have DOT regulated employees, you have to have a policy for those regulated employees. So if you have drivers, if you have CDL drivers, you need to have a policy that meets the FMCSA policy requirements. If you also, maybe you have, you're a pipeline company and you're working on natural gas lines. Well, you also have to have a policy for those companies or for those workers that are working on the pipeline because those folks are under the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration. That's a different DOT agency and they have different rules. So you have to have differentiating policies. You also should have a separate non-DOT policy. We encourage you not to try to combine policies. Sometimes it can get messy. Now, uh, Bill Judge and Nick Hartman next month they are fantastic presenters. They have such a wealth of knowledge. Bill has been an attorney in the drug testing space for decades. And so I really would encourage you to come next month to his presentation because they will address policies and give you way more information than we're going to provide today. So, but please just know that if you have CDL drivers, you've got your DOT policy, but you also have a non-DOT policy that all employees have to adhere to. So your CDL holders or your DOT covered employees have to adhere to two sets of policies. So that's important to have that distinction and have those policies well written, especially if you're in multiple states. Having that addendum for each state for your non-DOT policy is essential because every state law is different, particularly regarding marijuana laws, and we'll talk about that in just a bit. Number two, you've obviously got to do testing. So if it's a DOT requirement, if you've got to do a DOT required test, we got to make that happen. If you want to do testing under your company policy that doesn't meet the DOT requirements, that should be a non-DOT test. And so your ARC Point team there where you are can definitely help you with that to make sure that you understand the differences between non-DOT and DOT and when each test is required. You've got to provide training and education. We talked about this a little bit when we were discussing the EAP, but you've got to provide employee education that talks about drugs and alcohol, their effects on the body, and use and abuse. You've also got to provide supervisor training. So the DOT rule says that any supervisor that can require an employee to submit to reasonable suspicion testing must have 2 hours of signs and symptoms training. So I know you probably think you know what someone looks like when they come to work stoned or drunk, but we're going to tell you. And we're going to give you the checklist and we're going to give you the tools that you need to make that determination. And we're also going to tell you what happens next. So you have a supervisor that comes forward. They say, hey, Leslie showed up to work. She looks like she's stoned. What do I do next? You're going to have the tools to be able to tell your supervisor what to do next. So it's super important. Again, 2 hours are required by the DOT rule. And for some of our modalities like FAA, they want you to do that recurrently. And so it's not just a one and done thing. You have to do recurrent training, so every couple of years. Uh, and then other professional services. So for FMCSA, you have to do the previous employment verification. In the past, we had to do written verification for drugs and alcohol and also the safety performance history. Now, the FMCSA clearinghouse can take the place of the written drug and alcohol records check. However, you must still do the safety performance history check. So that is still required for 3 years on your drivers. Also, just be aware that's all drivers who drive in trucks 10,001 pounds and more. For those drivers, you have all the DOT requirements other than drug and alcohol testing. Drug and alcohol testing doesn't kick in until you get to 26,001 pounds. But if you have drivers that are driving trucks 10,001 pounds and more, you do have to do driver qualification files. You do have to pull MVRs. You do have to do the safety performance history check, and we can help you with that as well. Just wanted to make sure some people forget about those 10,001 pound drivers. They meet all the same requirements as a CDL driver, except for drug and alcohol and clearinghouse. SAP resources, we can definitely, as we talked about, you do have to have a SAP in case you have someone who tests positive. Even if you're terminating that driver or that employee, you still must give them a list of SAPs where they can seek counseling and participate in the DOT's return to duty program. And then EAP services, we've already talked about that. But some of the modalities do require an EAP, whether it's internal or external. But EAP services it's a really good deal, really needed right now. We've got employees that are struggling. We've got, after COVID, the calls to our crisis lines went up by about 600%. And so having an EAP service where an employee can reach out if they or a family member are having issues, can be a huge win and a real, will help your employees stay invested. Okay, if you have any questions about any of the four components, please pop those in the Q&A and we will get those answered. But we're going to move on to the reasons for testing. We're going to just talk about them real quickly from each one of them from the DER's perspective, what you need to know. And then at the bottom of each slide, there are some action steps you need to be aware of. So again, as I said earlier, you've got to do a pre-employment DOT test before you put someone in the driver's seat if they're a driver or before they do their safety sensitive function for the first time. If you are moving someone from a non-covered position to a covered position, you must do a pre-employment test. Sometimes our employers forget to do that. because the person's been there for 10 years. They've been working in the warehouse. They go and get their CDL license, and now they're going to drive a truck. Well, that's great. We are all for employee improvement and personal improvement and growth, but you cannot forget to do that pre-employment drug screen. All right, your action steps. Make sure you remember that drug testing is required. Alcohol testing is optional. You can do alcohol testing for pre-employment if you want to, but you don't have to. But it must be stated in the company policy whether you're going to do it or not. That's another reason you need a policy. Um, all right, employers hiring a CDL driver must also conduct a query in the clearinghouse prior to hiring the driver and putting them in the driver's seat. Just like with your pre-employment drug screen, you've got to do that pre-employment query. The employee cannot begin work until you've got both the negative drug screen and the pre-employment query in the file showing that the driver is not prohibited. Now, let me remind you this. If you have a driver who is prohibited in the clearinghouse, meaning they've had a positive drug screen, alcohol test, or refusal to test reported, if they are prohibited, they can drive no commercial truck, not even a small 10,001 pound truck. Um, so if you're hiring a CDL driver, even if you're putting them in a non-CDL truck, you still should do a pre-employment query to make sure that they are not prohibited in the clearinghouse. Sometimes we have not done a great job of preaching that gospel. And so I just want to make sure we're really super clear that anytime you're hiring a CDL driver to drive any type of vehicle, you should run a pre-employment query. All right, random testing. Each agency sets the random rates for drug and alcohol testing in the agency that it regulates. You have to do your random selections by computerized random number generator. ArcPoint has a consortium, which is a group of smaller companies. If you just have a handful of drivers, you can pop them in there. We can also manage a pool. If you have a larger number of client or of drivers or employees, we can put you in a standalone pool. Whichever way you go, you must have all covered employees in a testing pool. So currently, the FMCSA rate and most every other agency rate is 50%. The only exception to that is FAA, which is 25%. And then the alcohol testing rate is 10%. And that's the same thing across the board, with the exception of Coast Guard and Pipeline, PHMSA, because the Coast Guard and PHMSA do not allow for random alcohol testing. All right, so just a couple things. This is a big thing for all you DERs. Random tests must be unannounced. You cannot tell your employee to go make an appointment for your random test. That defeats the purpose of random testing, which is a deterrent. They cannot be notified in advance. Now, when you get your random selection list, if you've got your drivers or your employees in the ArcPoint consortium and you get your list selections, and let's say Ryan is selected for testing, then you don't, let's say Ryan is really busy this week. It's the busiest week of your year. It's crazy. Everybody's working, lots of overtime going out the door. You don't have to do that test right now, but you don't want to forget it forever. Let's do it next week when it's not so busy. Now, again, you want to keep that close to the vest. Don't want to tell Ryan. I probably wouldn't even tell a supervisor that he's been selected. You do not want to notify that employee until you're ready for them to go for their test. And so if it's not convenient for them to walk out the door and go to ArcPoint to have that specimen collection completed, don't notify them. Um, if the employee's off duty, if they're not doing a safety sensitive function, you can't send them for a random alcohol test. For alcohol testing, they have to be doing their safety sensitive function when you send them. So if you've got a driver who sometimes dispatches, when he's dispatching, you can send him for his random drug screen. When he's dispatching, you cannot send him for his random alcohol test. It is not illegal to dispatch while you're drunk. Not smart, but not illegal either. It is only illegal to get behind the wheel and drive a commercial motor vehicle. All right. Agency testing rates or minimums. You can test at a higher rate if you want to. And again, alcohol testing is not allowed for PHMSA and for Coast Guard. Reasonable suspicion testing. So testing is required when the employer has reasonable suspicion. Again, we talked about this when I was going over the supervisor training. If you have you believe an employee has shown up at work impaired, then you have to conduct a reasonable suspicion test. But you must make that determination on specific, contemporaneous, and articulable observations. So that means you can't say, "Oh, I have a gut feeling that Leslie is stoned." That doesn't work. You can't do a reasonable suspicion test based on that. You have to be able to say, Leslie came in, her eyes were red and glazy. She couldn't walk a straight line down the hall, and she looked very messy. She was unkempt. Her hair was a mess. She hadn't washed her clothes. She was wearing the same thing she wore yesterday. So those kind of things are specific, contemporaneous, meaning it's here and now. Like you can't, like if somebody called you 2 days ago and said, "Hey, I think Leslie's drunk," you can't do an alcohol test today. You should have done it 2 days ago. And it has to be articulable. So you have to be able to state what your observations are. In the reasonable suspicion training that ArcPoint has available, we do go over all of those items, and we do give you essentially a checklist. So make sure that you're attending one of those reasonable suspicion trainings. There are time limits, so after you make the determination, you need to get the alcohol test done within 2 hours of the time of the determination. If not, you have to start making notes of why you didn't get it done. You have 8 hours to complete the test. You can test the employee for both drugs or alcohol or both. Make sure your supervisors are trained. Also, note that reasonable suspicion is the only reason for test. You have to remove the person from duty until you get the results of the drug test. We have some companies that we work with that take someone off duty for post accident. That is just company policy. You don't have to take the person off duty until you get the drug test results back for any other reason except for reasonable suspicion. All right, post-accident testing. This is super important because this is the reason for testing that employers sometimes miss out the most. I have an employer I work with here in Atlanta, the Atlanta area. They have 4,500 drivers across the country. Last year, they did 200 and some post-accident drug screens. However, when we got the accident reports and we looked at everything, the criteria, what the accident was, we found that they should have done 6. So the DOT does not like it when you do a post-accident test as a DOT test when it should not have been. So if you have an accident that doesn't meet the DOT criteria, you should do a non-DOT post-accident test. So let's look at what the DOT criteria is. And since the lion's share of our folks on our call today are under FMCSA, um, I will go over that criteria. And also, even if you're not under the DOT, if you have a non-DOT program, a lot of our companies use this same criteria in making the determination when they're going to do even a non-DOT post-accident test. So number one, is there a human fatality? If there was, it doesn't matter what happened, whether your driver got cited or not, you must do a post-accident test. And post-accident testing is the only reason for tests that you always do both drug and alcohol if you're within the time limits. Bodily injury with immediate medical treatment away from the scene. If the driver was issued a citation for a moving violation, yes, you should do the testing. If they were not, no, you should not do DOT testing. Disabling damage to the motor vehicle requiring a tow away. If the driver was issued a citation, yes, you should do a DOT post-accident drug and alcohol test. If they were not, no, you should not do that. This is the one where we get the most errors because their driver's involved in a fender bender, both cars drive away from the scene. Even if the driver was cited, if no vehicle was towed, you should not do a DOT test. You can do a non-DOT, but you should not do a DOT. All right. Post-accident drug screens, they must be done within 32 hours after the accident. There's really in the system that we live in all the mobile collectors and the ArcPoint locations that go on site 24/7 to do your testing, there is really no reason that you can't get a drug test done within 32 hours unless your driver's injured or something and you can't do it because of that. But just from a location standpoint, unless you're in the backwoods in Alaska, there is really no reason you can't get a drug screen done within 32 hours. Post-accident alcohol tests, however, have a tighter time frame. Alcohol metabolizes much more quickly than drugs. And so we need to get our alcohol test done within 2 hours. If we can't get it done within 2 hours, we have to start documenting why. And after 8 hours, again, this is the same time limits we looked at with reasonable suspicion. After 8 hours, we should cease all opportunities to do that test. All right, return to duty. This is only done after a person has tested positive and they have completed the SAP process. They're ready to come back to work. There are a lot of steps to this. I don't want to get into the weeds with this now. If you have someone who's tested positive and you want them to come back to work, just call your ArcPoint team. They will help you step through that process and they'll get, I can get on the phone with you too and we can work through that together. I do want to say, however, return to duty is not done when a person has been off work due to an on-the-job injury, maternity leave, military leave, anything back, and they're coming back to work. That should be a pre-employment test if you've taken them out of the random testing pool. Return to duty is only if they have tested positive, been through the SAP, and are coming back to work. Okay, follow-up testing after the person has the return to duty test and comes back to work. They're in their own little random testing program. We call that follow-up testing. That's just a monitoring program to make sure that they are staying clean and sober. They have to have a minimum of 6 tests in 12 months, and the SAP can extend that if they would like. Ryan, do we have any questions that we need to talk about?
Indeed, we do, Leslie. We've got some coming through the chat and the majority of them coming through the Q&A. Let's just go straight to the top
Okay.
and ask the first by Nazreen. She said, driver for DOT test comes, but don't know what the reason for testing. What should be the right thing to do?
So the employer who's sending that person in for testing should tell you what to do, what reason for test. If they don't know, let's step them through the regulations. Is this the first time the person's doing their safety sensitive job? If so, that's a pre-employment. Were they picked for random testing? If so, that's random. But it is not the collector's responsibility to try to figure out, try to guess as to what the reason for test is, nor should the collector ask the employee why they're there for testing. If you have not been given the information, you should call the company and ask them. So it's on the company because onus of compliance is always on the employer. We want to make sure the employer is giving you the information.
Excellent. Fern asks, how can I request drug and alcohol history records for a new employee?
So there is a form that you need to fill out, and also ArcPoint um, has a resource for that through our total reporting. So you can, the previous employment is like the most tedious thing that we do. Actually, in my business, I've farmed that out to total reporting, and so we do that. But there is a form on the DOT's website that you can use. And if you will put your email address in the chat and just say, I need the previous employment form, we'll send it to you after the presentation today.
Wonderful. We have an anonymous question. Is an employee subject to DOT testing if they operate any vehicle over 10,000 pounds weight rating, which you spoke to earlier?
Okay, so they are not eligible for DOT testing until you get to 26,001 pounds. At 10,001 pound, everything else has to be done. They have to have a driver qualification file. You need to be pulling annual MVRs. They need to have a medical card. That's the big thing. You have to have a vehicle file, hours of service, all the other stuff. It's just the only difference is at 26,001, that's when they have to have a CDL. That's when you have to do DOT drug and alcohol testing. And that's when you have to adhere to the clearinghouse regulations.
Wonderful. Just a reminder, anyone who has questions, please use the Q&A function so we can get to it. If we can't address all questions today, Leslie has graciously offered to answer them, and we will get those to you in a follow-up email. Do you want one final question, Leslie, before we move on?
Sure.
Okay. We have from Angel, where can I find the full parameters of these supervisor training requirements, including the retraining requirements?
So again, most of the it's in Part 40 and it's also in well, it's better to go to your agency regulations. So if it's FMCSA, it's Part 382. If it's FAA, it's 120. I mean, it's 14 CFR Part 120. If it is PHMSA, it's Part 199. FTA is Part 655. you can go to those again. The regulation, most of the time it states it's a one and done. However, they consider best practice to be recurrent training. And I think some of the FAA, like when the FAA does inspections, they will expect to see recurrent training. So,
Wonderful. There was
yeah,
a part two to that, if I may, just last
sure.
time. What if you have supervisors who don't drive a lot? Can we send them for a random if they are not driving that day?
If they're not driving, they can do a drug screen. They cannot do an alcohol test unless they're driving a CDL vehicle.
Excellent.
Awesome. Okay, we've got a quiz in the up on the screen, so please answer that. We're going to come back to that in just a second. We're not going to go through the drugs that we test for one by one, but I just want you to see them in general because it really, when it's all said and done, we're testing for 13 or 14 drugs on the test panel. We call it a five panel. But it is it's lots more drugs than that because each drug is actually a separate analyte. So, like even under the opioid category, there's 7 different drugs that we test for. Um, so we're going to go next to, we're going to talk about, I said we're not going to talk about the drugs. I lied. We are going to talk about marijuana just because I mean, we talk about marijuana all the time. Ryan and I are so tired of talking about marijuana. We could just, we can't see straight, but we're going to talk about it one more time. So, Delta 9 THC is what is on the DOT drug screen. If you test positive for Delta 9, that is when that's the marijuana. You consider that you've tested positive for THC on the drug screen. CBD, you can get it a lot of places. However, many times it does not contain the low amount of THC that it is advertised. Mayo Clinic did a study, and I think between 70 and 80% of the CBD had a different percentage of THC than was advertised. If you test positive on a drug screen, even if you've been doing CBD, it is still going to be considered a positive drug screen for marijuana. So I am pretty old. I grew up in the 80s when President Reagan was in office. His wife Nancy was fantastic. And she, what was her big saying? Just say no. So I have gone out back to my Nancy Reagan archives, and I'm telling you to please tell your drivers, just say no to CBD and Delta 8. Delta 8 is also a molecule found in the marijuana plant. However, most of the time it is made chemically. So very rare do we find natural Delta 8. Usually it's a chemical. You can buy it at most smoke shops and probably behind the counter you can also buy the Delta 9. But please make sure your drivers understand that CBD and Delta 8, while they can be purchased legally, we do not advise anyone who's in a DOT or any kind of drug testing program to use those products. It's not worth the risk because now with the clearinghouse, we have to report positives to there. So not only do they lose their job with you as their employer, it's going to be problematic for them. Now, 75% of you think that, do your drivers think they can use marijuana? No. So this for 75% of you who've trained your drivers that President Trump's executive order, they can't smoke weed yet, then that's great. So we're going to come back to that, but you all have done a great job. Now, and we're going to come back to the executive order in just a bit. Okay, return to duty program. We've talked about this. I just want to make sure you understand they've got to go through the SAP evaluation. The SAP releases them for the return to duty test, and then they have to have the follow-up testing plan for at least 6 tests in 12 months. You've got to make sure that your SAP is qualified to do the evaluation because if they're not qualified, it's just like the evaluation never happened. It would be a problem. So if you have a driver going through SAP, you've got to have the initial evaluation, the follow-up, and the follow-up testing plan from the SAP. Do not skip that step. Make sure that when they complete it, they have the return to duty drug screen that's entered to the clearinghouse and the driver becomes not prohibited. So if you have any questions about that, like I said, it's a super tedious process. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about it today, but just let your ARC Point team know if you need help with that. All right, prohibitions. A covered employee must not report to work, continue to work, or continue to work while taking medication. even if it's prescription or over the counter. So if you've got someone who's taking a pain pill, they've been given a prescription for Tylenol 3 or something like that, Tylenol with codeine, make sure that they have been cleared by their physician to work. You cannot allow them to work whether you think they're using illegal drugs or legal drugs. You must make sure that they are working safely. You, as the DER, must remove them from duty, or you must see that they've been removed from duty. If they've tested positive, they have to be evaluated by a SAP. If they've not tested positive, they're just taking a prescription medication. You've got to help them get that clearance letter from their treating physician. They need to be off work until you do that. There are also prohibitions for alcohol. So our DOT concentration, what we consider a positive is 0.04. It has to be removed from duty. The driver or employee has to be removed from duty and go through SAP. However, there are pre-duty use prohibitions. The employees or the drivers cannot use alcohol within 4 hours prior to performing their comfort functions. This does not mean they can go out and drink a case of beer and then 4 hours later come to work. This means they can't have any alcohol at all within 4 hours of coming to work. That is, each agency sets their own parameters for that. If you're an FAA, if you have pilots, they have an 8 hour rule, 8 hour bottle to throttle. So just make sure that your employees know their pre-duty prohibitions, and then on-duty use. Obviously, they can't drink while they're at work. Now, I am going to go through this just on behalf of all of us who collect drug screens. We want you to know that we sometimes there are problems at the collection site, whether it's Arc Point or wherever, and we want to make sure that you are aware of those and what we have to do as collectors to complete a successful collection. So sometimes you as DERs, you have the worst timing ever. You notify someone to come for their random drug screen just as they're walking out of the bathroom, and they get there and they can't give us a sample. If that happens, they cannot leave until they give us a sample. So just make sure that if you know they have to pick up their kids at daycare at 5 o'clock, don't send them for their drug screen at 4:30. That's not fair to anybody. Make sure that they have enough time to complete the test should they get there and they not be able to give us a specimen. Uh, if that happens, we're going to, contact you. The collector will be in touch with you to go through what happens next. If at the end of 3 hours they can't give us a specimen, then they have to be evaluated by a physician, determine if there's a medical reason why or not. And we can, again, your ARC Point team can help you with that. Tampered specimens. They give us a cold specimen, a hot specimen. We have to do a second collection, and that second collection has to be observed, meaning someone has to go into the bathroom with them, watch them watch them give their specimen. It is the worst thing in the world. We all hate doing it, and they don't like it either. So, but just know that's going to happen if they give us a tampered specimen. And actually, you're going to get a bill for two tests because we have to send the first specimen and the second specimen to the laboratory. Your employee must cooperate with the collection process. Please, 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 when you're doing your onboarding training, make sure that you tell your employees to cooperate with the collector, whether it's emptying their pockets, whether it's just coming in and being polite in the waiting room. If they are not, we can consider this a refusal to test. Now, I talked about tampered specimens. If you have not uh, paid attention to what can go on with drug in the drug testing world, here's your brief education. UPass, which you can purchase at any um, corner gas station, is fake urine, is synthetic urine. It comes in a little bottle with a temperature strip and a hand warmer so they can get it warm. So it's a body temperature, or urine luck. That is a detoxifying agent. They put that into their sample after they have given their sample into the cup. It interferes with the testing process. Both of these are, we can with the urine luck, we really don't know it's there, but the lab will tell us. With the UPass, the synthetic urine, any good collector can pick that up in a second and a half, and so we will let them know and let you know that that was a tampered specimen, and we have to do the follow-up. When the specimen goes to the lab, they do two tests before they report it as positive. The first test, if it's a negative, it reports out that we get the results pretty quickly. If it's a confirmation test, they have to report it as a positive. That will go to the MRO, which we'll talk about in a second. Split testing is done. The donor can request a split test if their test is positive. You cannot deny the individual the right to have that done if they can't pay. You can ask them to pay for it, but if they say, I can't afford it, you still have to do it. You still have to let them request the split and you will have to pay the bill. And I'm sorry to say that, but that's just the DOT rule. All right, medical review officer. The medical review officer is the physician who reviews the drug screen. You, as the DER, need to be friends with your ARC Point team and ultimately with the MRO because they are going to be your friend who are going to tell you if your folks can come to work or not. If you get a test result that's a negative, that's great. Put them to work right away. If you get a negative dilute, meaning that the person has consumed a bunch of water, you can retest if it's in your company policy. This is another reason you need to have a good company policy. And Bill and Nick will talk about that next month. Um, Positive, adulterated, substituted are all bad. That's considered a positive test. They can't work. Occasionally, there'll be something wrong with the specimen, and that we will have to cancel that test and require a recollection. Don't get mad if that happens. It's just physiology. It could be that they put something in like the urine luck we saw. It could be that they put that in their specimen and the lab picked it up and so they had to cancel the test. So those are the things you need to know about laboratory testing, collection, and MRO. A drug test is nothing more than a four-legged stool. The collection, the lab, the MRO, and you as the DER, because you are just as important as the rest of us. Consequences of an alcohol test. The only thing I want to talk about is if you get a result from the ARC Point team that says you've got an employee whose test was between 0.020 and 0.039. If you're a trucking company, they have to be removed from duty for 24 hours. You can't retest them. Any of the other agencies, it's usually 8 hours or until they can blow below a 0.020. At 0.04 and above, that's when they have to be evaluated by a SAP. All right, clearinghouse for all of us trucking friends. Um, as of about, I don't know, 15 months ago, the Clearinghouse 2 regulations went into effect that says if a driver has a clearinghouse violation, that's reported to the feds. The feds send that down to the state, and the state will downgrade their CDL license. The only way for them to get their license upgraded is to go through the DOT's return to duty process. In some states, that's very quick. In Georgia, that's happening within 2 to 3 days. The rule says no more than 60 days, and some states are taking a little bit longer. Um, Let's see. Here are the numbers just because I'm horrified at this. Maybe you might be surprised too. Drivers with at least one violation. Since the clearinghouse started in 2020, we have reported 328,431 drivers to the clearinghouse as of the end of last year. And so far, 202,000 of them are still in a prohibited status. There were two big updates. There was an update in 2023 that added oral fluid testing as an option. Oral fluid testing for DOT testing is still not a go because the labs still are not certified to do that. They're working on it, but they're not certified, so we still cannot do oral fluid testing for DOT testing. Now you can do it for non-DOT testing, and that I would encourage you to talk to your ARC Point team there locally about that because it may be a good option for you. But what the 2023 update did is it emphasized again the importance of the DER to give 24/7 contact information to the collection site. Please, 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 if we have an issue with the collection, if you've got a donor who's not cooperating, if they have left, whatever it is, we have to call you. We must have 24/7 contact information for you and for a backup. If you think you're going to get up from your desk and go to the bathroom or go to lunch or, God forbid, go on vacation, you must have a backup DER and we need to know who that is. And we need to have their contact information as well. Now, in 2025, there are a few updates that came out. They proposed fentanyl testing. That has not passed yet. I mean, it's not made its way through the process yet. It may, next year, year after maybe, but it is still in a proposal state. Again, oral fluid testing still not available. The employer handbook update. Please, if nothing else, um, go to the DOT website. The link is right there. Download that employer handbook. You have more responsibility than you think you have, and you need to know what that is. So please download that handbook. All right. Marijuana reclassification. This is a big thing. So on December 18th, President Trump signed an order directing the Department of Justice to expedite the reclassification of marijuana from a Schedule 1 to a Schedule 3. Everybody think that's a great idea. However, by law, if that happens, marijuana would immediately come off the drug testing panel. So your school bus drivers could be stoned, your truck drivers could be stoned, your airline pilots could be stoned. The person who's captaining your ship when you go on your uh, Caribbean vacation cruise could be stoned, and we can't test for it. So, what we have done is we have uh, made this we've really gone out to the public, we've gone out to our legislators, and really, really, really emphasized this. So, two things to know. Number one, it has not happened. Marijuana is still a Schedule 1 drug. It is still illegal. You still cannot use it. It is still on a drug testing panel. The way the executive order was written, it says this regulation or this executive order cannot affect any other federal agency regulations. The DOT took that to mean this executive order does not affect our DOT drug testing regulations. However, that's pretty flimsy. And so we are working in our industry, we're working really hard to make sure that our representatives and our senators know that this is a safety issue. This is a priority, and we want to make sure that we have what we call a safety carve out that allows us to continue testing for THC if marijuana is truly rescheduled to a Schedule 3. So we invite you, we beg you to please, please, please join us in this effort to make sure that our federal House representatives and senators know that this is an important safety issue, and we do not want to lose the ability to test for marijuana on our drug testing panel. Why does all this drug testing stuff matter? Well, number one, it's a safety issue, like I said. But it's also a dollars and cents issue. You can pay a little bit for a drug screen, or you can pay the DOT a whole bunch of money if you don't have one, and they find that out during an audit. The maximum fine for not having a random testing program in place is over $18,000. If you've got that kind of money to give away, let me send you my name and number. You can give it to me. I would love to take another vacation this year. The maximum fine for not having clearinghouse in place is almost 7,000, so that's a big chunk of change as well. There are new rules for the CDL DOT physical exams. Make sure, this is a bottom line, make sure that when your CDL drivers are going for their physical exams, that you 2 to 3 days later are pulling an MVR to verify that that CDL, the medical exam date, the new expiration date has been added to their MVR. If it hasn't, they could lose their license, their CDL privileges could be downgraded. If you have any questions about that, let us know. We're happy to help. This is just sort of an extra tidbit for you. Has nothing to do with drug testing. We want to make sure that you're aware of this because it is a big deal. There's still 8 states that have not complied with the new physical exam regulations, what they call the National Registry 2. And so the DOT has a waiver program in place. And just know this only affects CDL holders. Your non-CDL drivers driving 10,001 pounds or more have to have a medical exam. They still have to have a card because that reporting of their exam to the National Registry and the National Registry downloading it to the state does not affect non-CDL drivers. It's only your CDL drivers that it affects. So if you have any questions about that, you can pop them into the Q&A. If we can't get to them, we will certainly answer them later. So,
Hey, Leslie, real quick time
yeah,
check.
that's it.
Oh, perfect. Please go ahead. If you have closing comments, then I can take it from there.
Yeah, so the bottom line is number one, make sure your drivers understand marijuana is still illegal. Don't use CBD and Delta 8. You can get in trouble for that. Um, Make sure that you are up to date on your policy. Make sure that if you have not updated your policy since the clearinghouse went into effect in 2020, if you've not updated your policy since the marijuana laws changed, if you've not updated your policy since the oral fluid testing regulations came out in 2023, you need to update your policy. And please attend Bill and Nick's seminar next month because they will go into that. And then just know that your ArcPoint team is there to help. If there's anything that has to do with the truck, whether it's a question about your tags and titles and the taxes and the fees and all that stuff that you have to pay, whether it's driver qualification files, whether it's, oh my gosh, I'm being audited and what do I do next? Please, please call your ArcPoint team, and we are certainly happy to help you. We want you to have confidence in your program and that you are, you know, if you are working with us, then you don't have to worry about it because it is buttoned up. And we'll work together on that. I mean, sometimes we have to do some training, sometimes we have to put some things in place, but you're in a good spot if you've got questions. So that's all I got, and I'll turn it back to Ryan.
Awesome, Leslie. Thank you so much. Always timely, helpful information for our network. Thank you. We have an unbelievable amount of questions, which unfortunately, due to time constraints, we can't get to. Today, we will address them. So please keep an eye out in your inbox. Leslie, again, has graciously offered her time beyond this webinar to answer every question that was submitted today. So if you put a question in the chat or in the Q&A, it will be answered, okay? And we will send out the answers to those questions via email by end of Tuesday, or excuse me, end of day next Tuesday. Please let Leslie know what you thought about today's webinar by completing the post-webinar survey. Survey link will be posted in the chat shortly, along with the registration link for March's webinar. Thank you, ArcPoint marketing team. The survey will also pop up on a separate window upon conclusion of today's webinar if you don't have a pop-up blocker installed. Also, let ArcPoint know how we can make your job easier, right? Your business more compliant, your workers happier, healthier, safer, more productive. This is what we do at ArcPoint, and it's what we love to do. So keep the feedback rolling in. Next, if you are a credentialed HR professional, please look in the chat for your activity IDs through HRCI and SHRM. These IDs will also be listed on your certificate of attendance, which will also be emailed to all participants by end of day next Tuesday, along with a PDF copy of today's slide deck. If you have additional questions for Leslie, feel free to follow and connect with her on LinkedIn. And also feel free to reach out to her directly via email. Leslie, is that okay with you?
Absolutely.
Kind of has to be
I'll
now, right? I just put you on the spot.
That's okay. So my email it's pretty easy. Like again, our company's compliance systems. Our email is leslie@compliancesystemsllc.com. But also just don't hesitate to let your ArcPoint team know if you have questions and they can pass those on to us.
Yeah, thank you. Which I was going to say next. We partner with Leslie and other experts like Leslie. So the best kind of best practice is to reach out directly to your local ArcPoint Labs provider and then allow us to plug into our network of experts as necessary to get you the answers and the solutions that you're looking for. If you have any other questions outside of today's topic, know that ArcPoint does offer a suite of employer solutions, including drug testing, random program management, DOT physicals, policy review, supervisory training, and the list goes on. Check out arcpointlabs.com/employer-solutions to learn more, and that link will also be posted in the chat very shortly. Getting closer here to wrapping up. As we talked about earlier, our next Thrive webinar will be held on Thursday, March 19th, exactly 1 month from today. Leslie knows the DSI crew quite well. Bill Judge, Nick Hartman, they do a fantastic job. Drug-free workplace experts. They're well aware of today's topic, so they're going to be kind of expanding on it and talking a little bit more about policy. Okay, so if you can, go ahead and register for that today. The link is in the chat. If you'd like to sign up for email webinar notifications, so every time we have a webinar and we communicate that to our network, if you want to be notified, you can sign up. Simply go to arcpointlabs.com/webinars and complete the short form at the top of the page. Also, towards the bottom of the page, you'll see an archive of past ArcPoint webinars. I saw many of you were asking about today's recording because it had such good information. I think one of you said, and it did. Where can I access the recording? It'll be posted by end of day tomorrow to our website. So arcpointlabs.com/webinars, and you can listen to an encore presentation. All right, we are near the top of the hour, Leslie. You already gave some quick tidbits and takeaways, but 10, 15 seconds. One takeaway from our people today, what would that be?
DOT compliance is not complicated. You've just got to have a checklist. You've just got to have the right checklist. And if you don't have that checklist, let us know. Let your ArcPoint representative know. We'll get together. We'll get you the checklist, and we can help you solve those issues so that you do sleep well at night and you feel confident in your DOT program.
Wonderful. On behalf of the entire ArcPoint team, a very special thank you once again to our presenter, Leslie Prince with Compliance Systems, and to everyone attending, our valued partners and loyal members of the ArcPoint Network. It is an honor to serve you and to help you create compliant, safe, and healthy workplaces that thrive. We'll see you next month.